The idea of the Black Madonna series came about as a result of a dinner party, actually. Some friends were over, we were talking about Catholicism, and it reminded me of all the Black Madonnas that I had seen in my travels, sometimes in Europe and sometimes in Brazil. And I was wondering, it's like, what's the story on those? And so I started to do a little bit more research. I'd always had a great deal of admiration for icons, particularly Russian icons. And I was thinking about doing something kind of more of a contemporary icon. And so I went to the classic pictures of the Madonna by Raphael and by Leonardo da Vinci and Bellini, and I decided to blackify it. But at the same time, I wanted to make a serious political statement. So I started putting these images in the background of white supremacists that were being persecuted to show this contrast between this unconditional love and this other side, which exists in the subconscious. Bisecting the pieces are always these characterizations of my mantra, which is, I've kind of created a logo type that represents that. And they go down the middle of the piece, and on either side you have this gold leaf, which again kind of attests to the value that I place in these things. Well, the mechanics behind meditation actually involve this repetition of a mantra. A mantra can be compared to a vowel. It has no meaning. So consequently, if you're repeating this on a subvocal level, your mind doesn't have anything to focus on. So it basically starts to focus on itself. And in doing that, what you're doing is actually slipping through different layers of the subconscious. And so the idea of the Black Madonna itself existed in my subconscious. It's like, what if? And my Catholicism kind of kicks in, and it's like I'd seen all these things when I was growing up, but they were always white. So what if? And then going even deeper still, that thing that exists in the subconscious, that very negative thing that represents these white supremacists that are being persecuted, that also exists in the subconscious. And there's this battle between good and evil, so to speak, or the positive and the negative. The negative in this case being diminished by size and being more or less dominated by the mother and child figure. But I started to realize that while I was exploring the subconscious, I had to think too that those images of persecution exist in somebody else's subconscious. So in thinking about the very negative images that exist in the background of these white supremacists that are being persecuted, I realized that to some degree that exists in their subconscious, that primal fear. It has a lot to do with the whole idea of tribalism. So for instance, if somebody in my tribe committed some heinous act, they resorted to slavery or they were persecuting, stuff like that, even though I'm removed from that by hundreds of years and generations, in the back of my mind, I would always be fearful of retribution. And so understanding that vision of retribution exists in somebody else's subconscious, I'm basically putting it out there. Here's what that looks like, okay? Deal with it. And so that's kind of at the root of why I'm including these things. The other part of that is that I'm hoping that once you're able to envision yourself as being a victim, it might instill in you some sense of empathy and caring for the people that you've persecuted in this way. It's a stretch, I understand. I don't expect everybody to resonate with it, but if you think about the mechanics of meditation and how you're going through this, and it exists in the subconscious, maybe it can make an impact on people. I always kept thinking to myself, how much deeper would my spirituality have been when I was growing up and going to Catholic school and participating in all those rituals and things like that. How much deeper would my spirituality have been had the images that I was looking at of mother and child, or even Christ for that matter, been true to their colors? Or in this case, what if they had been black? And the thing is, the Catholic Church was notorious for going into, different countries and blackifying or making the Virgin Mary yellow or red or whatever color they felt they needed to in order to appeal to the indigenous populations. But here, for whatever reason, we were raised that this pure, milky white Virgin Mary that was it. That was all you had to deal with. I decided to take that idea and flip it on its head. The issues that are brought up aren't new to me. It's something that persisted through my teen years and through my early college experiences and stuff like that. So it's nothing new. It's just coincidence that at this point in time, people are starting to pay attention to issues like Black Lives Matter, stuff like that. So in that regard, the work is very timely. In the 1960s and 1970s in Los Angeles, you couldn't really navigate in this town if you were African American, unless you had those political sensibilities. At the time, the Black Panther Party was very prominent, the US Organization, Black Student Union, Black Student Alliance, things like this. In academia, they teach you that the only responsibility the artist has is to themselves. But given the sense of community that I grew up in, we started to feel that the artist really had a responsibility to the people. And so when they were talking about, I'm black and I'm proud, or black is beautiful, we were looking for images that said that. And a lot of the artists took up that challenge. So as a result, a lot of the work was very figurative, very didactic. There were a few artists that were doing some pretty out there kind of abstraction and conceptualism and stuff like that, but they weren't taking that seriously. One of the things that we realized too is in the art world here, there was a quota that they would allow through the door. So many people were allowed to become successful, they were anointed, and then everybody else was kind of put to the side. We realized that those people who were anointed needed our support. And so we realized that out of deference, we were willing to wait our turn. But a lot of artists in my generation, their turn never came, and they got frustrated, and they just gave up. I persist because I had that kind of training. My father was in the military, and the whole idea of being a victim didn't appeal to him. Matter of fact, he said, if you really want to see what a victim is, I can make you a victim. So as a result, I decided that, this was what I was put here to do. Understanding that it was going to be a tough road to hoe. Oftentimes, or even when I was growing up, I didn't know any African American artists that were making a living at it. They were all doing something else. But I got a clear understanding of what passion was. And if you have a passion to do something, the aspect of whether or not it's financially successful really starts to diminish, over the years. It just becomes less and less important. And I had pretty much gotten to that point, where it's like, I have the freedom to do anything that I want to because it's not selling. So it afforded me a great deal of freedom. I'm very thankful for that. I worked at the Watts Towers as the director there from 1993 to 2001. It was singularly the most challenging job I've ever had. That community has been abused and neglected for so long, and here you are, a petty bureaucrat, kind of caught in the middle of all of that. So it's like whenever they thought of the city of Los Angeles, the reminder of it was right across the street. There are the towers. Let's go talk to Mark. He can fix it because he works for the city. But the history of it is really quite amazing. After the Watts Rebellion in 1965, there was an art center in Compton called the Compton Communicative Arts Academy. And it was founded jointly by Noah Purifoy, John Otterbridge, and Judson Powell. It was a space where just about anything could happen. Dedicated to the arts, dedicated to all the arts. Theater, music, the visual arts, everything you can imagine. Noah Purifoy decided that the Watts Towers actually needed something that would set it apart from, I guess, the rest of the art establishment in this town. And he and Curtis Tan and a few other people started having art classes on the foundation of Simon Rodia's house. They put a tarp over it, and kids would come in most weekends. Artists would drop in, basically volunteer their time to teach classes there. It outgrew itself quite quickly, and people in the community said, we need an actual structure. So they had this campaign where they had a little button that had 1 square inch that was marked out on it. And they sold those buttons for $1. And each one of those dollars went to putting up the building that became the Watts Towers Art Center. Originally, it was supposed to be a temporary structure. It was built on a concrete slab. And it's been temporary now for 45 years. They've recently added another building to the campus now. It's the Charlie Minkus Art Center also. In the early 70s, the committee to save Simon Rodia's Watts Towers realized that they couldn't manage it anymore. So they turned the towers and the art center over to the city of Los Angeles. And so it became a city facility with all that entails, bureaucracy, and things that you can't do and stuff like that. The first director there was John Otterbridge, and John was there for 18 years. A lot of the materials that both John and Noah used in their work were actually remnants of the Watts Rebellion of '65. Noah would oftentimes incorporate burnt wood from some of the buildings that had been destroyed. A lot of the found objects that John Otterbridge put in some of his assemblage was stuff that was from that period also. So there was a certain magic about that place. John left after 18 years. For a brief time, Willie Middlebrook was the director there. And then I came in, and I was there for 9 years. And currently the director is Rosie Lee Hooks. And she's been there for almost 18 years now herself. Well, I came to the artistic path in a kind of a circuitous route. I really was very interested in chemistry at the time. And I bought one of those my mother bought me one of those little chemistry sets. And not satisfied with the chemicals that they gave me, I found a few other things that I could mix together. And I had something of an explosion one time that took my hairline back and singed my eyelashes and eyebrows. And when my mother and I finally got the fire out, she gave me a whipping that lasted for the better part of 3 weeks. You know, every time she'd see me, she could just reach across and bop me one. And I was trying to say, is this going to be my existence going forward forever? But I started doing these little drawings as kind of like peace offerings. And, you know, after maybe 2 or 3 of them, it started to catch her attention. And she'd show them to some people, and some people suggested that maybe I had a little bit of talent. So there was a frame shop that was on Santa Barbara, which is now King Boulevard, near Crenshaw. And there was a guy that was teaching painting there. And most of the people there were white. I was the only kid that was there. I was about 12 years old, I guess. I'd always pick the most difficult painting to try to copy. And bless his heart, I mean, he tried to help me as much as he could. I made just about every mistake that you could make in oil painting. And then later I found out that I was allergic to oils, and so I had to start working in acrylic. But I was, particularly in my teenage years, I was kind of hanging around with the wrong people. Had I continued, I probably wouldn't be here today because most of them are either dead or in prison. I had an inspirational teacher at the time. His name was John Riddle. And John told me that I could be a pretty good artist, but he said, it's only if you live that long. And I think those words kind of rang in my head. It's like, okay, maybe I need to make a life change at this point. Through John, I was able to get into a Saturday art training program called Tutor Arts that was sponsored by the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company. And the teachers there were John Riddle, William Pajot, and Charles White. And you couldn't have three better teachers at one time. And they were, well, Charlie in particular was a pretty strict taskmaster. It's like he would not let you do things wrong. If he saw you going down the wrong road, he would hammer it into you that this is not the place, this is not what you're going to do. You're going to do it the right way, even if it takes more time. And because I had such admiration for his work and admiration for him, I think that was another thing that kind of propelled me into, deciding that this was my vocation. This is what I wanted to do. I wound up going to Cal State Long Beach, which was kind of a traumatic experience. Again, this was in the late 60s, early 70s. The place was politically charged. I got in under the Educational Opportunities Program, EOP, which gave me about a year to get my act together. And my first art class that was there, first painting class, the teacher told me, he says, I don't have enough room in the class for you, but I understand you need to take this class, so I will put you in this classroom across the hall, and I'll come check on you from time to time. And so I was effectively segregated from the rest of the class. Oftentimes I would miss critiques because I never knew about them. To this day, I wonder what I might have missed as a result of that. Some of the other art teachers I had were, a lot more accommodating. There was a teacher, Frank Cummings III, who was a three-dimensional art teacher there, who went on to become the chair of the department at Cal State Fullerton, I think. But he was one of those people that I could lean on. There were those times when I was really discouraged, and it seemed like the teachers that I had there were trying to discourage me. It's like, you don't want to do this. And, it was years later I realized that the reason they were saying that was because I was playing in their backyard and they didn't like it. And when you talk about the art world, to a large extent, I think a lot of African Americans feel that way. It's like there's a certain resentment to my being here, but I'm going to be here nonetheless, up in your face, okay? And I'm going to tell you things that you don't need to hear, or that you don't want to hear around. And so I think, it's teachers like Frank Cummings III really kind of bolstered me in those beliefs, some of those, in helping me develop that resolve. But growing up in Los Angeles in the 60s, there were two major gangs. One was called the Slossons and the other was called the Gladiators. Whenever you traveled any place in South Central or an African American neighborhood, you could be challenged at any time. It's like, well, what set are you from? And if you gave the wrong answer, you could be dropped where you were. Back in those days, they didn't kill people as much as they maimed them and left them alive to tell the story about who they had run into. Whenever I got challenged, I'd say I'm from Catholic school, and by the time they figured that out, I was halfway down the block. Okay, but both those gangs slowly died out, and then the Black Power movement became much more prominent. But as it started to dissipate, the youth, some of these were the children of Black Panther members, or the children of us members and stuff like that. They started looking for their own political outlet, things that they wanted to say, things that appealed to their generation. As a result of that, they formed an organization called Community Revolution in Progress, which turned into the Crips. So initially, the reasons for the gang were actually very altruistic. But it got kind of subverted within about the first year and became kind of the violent thing that everybody started to associate the gang with. Collateral actually speaks to all those who were killed because they got caught in the crossfire between these two gangs. The Bloods came along, as kind of this counterbalancing. The genesis of the Bloods is still a little murky in terms of understanding where it came from. And that actually calls forth a lot of suspicion as to why the Bloods were ever allowed to become as big as they did. But this collateral piece deals with those people that were killed in the crossfire. And at the bottom of the image that looks like the Pieta, where Mary is holding her son, you'll see a bunch of tennis shoes. And these tennis shoes are the shoes of all the people who were killed by mistake or killed because they got caught between the two gangs. On either side, you have the Crips, symbolized by the blue bandana, and you have the Bloods symbolized by the red bandana. And I chose to put all these figures in their underwear because I wanted them to appear to be very vulnerable. Because that's what was happening at the time. We were all very vulnerable. I can remember at the time I was the director of a park, and we had a dance that was for the girls' softball team. And of course, the gangs weren't invited, but they decided to invite themselves. And they had a little war up there. 5 people got shot. One person was shot 3 times. I kind of pulled him in the office. It was a pretty harrowing experience. Collateral is a memorial to all those that lost their lives because of the senseless killing between these two gangs. Across from that, we have a piece called Truce, which actually is about the gang truce, which in 1993, the Crips and Bloods came together and decided to make peace. They started to realize that they weren't really each other's enemies, and that there was some sort of outside force that was pitting them against each other. Because it really kind of coincides with a period where the police were as repressive as they are now. Not as many people were killed, or at least not that many people were recorded to have been killed. But this was under the command of Chief Parker, who was arguably one of the worst police chiefs, I think, that ever came to this city.
The difficulties in meeting this is that we're trying to find a failure other than the people themselves. And this is a very dangerous move because it serves to sort of sanctify their acts.
His racist tendencies were put on display almost regularly, and they were to some degree amplified by his successor, Gates. The irony is that I worked for the police department for 13 years as a police artist, so I came to understand that culture very well. I realized that there were very good police and there were people that should not have been on the job under any circumstances. So Truce is about that piece that was made between the two. There is another piece that has yet to be completed in this trilogy of pieces. It's a trilogy of triptychs. And I'm still kind of formulating that. I think it's going to have a lot to do with, it's going to be probably a lot more violent. It's going to show what was really happening at the time. So it'll be kind of a counterbalance to Truce, and Collateral will be somewhere in the middle. It's difficult to bring yourself to actually record that level of violence. But at the same time, it's the type of thing that needs to be exposed. It needs to be out there. People need to understand that this exists, and it exists because of this. So in Truce, there's a central figure who is actually based loosely on an experience that I had when I was in Brazil. I was able to go to an Egungun ceremony, which Egungun is a practice that comes from Central Africa. It was carried across the Atlantic by slaves and became a big part of Candomblé in northern Brazil, in the state of Bahia. During this ceremony, people are actually in a trance, and you're locked in a room with about 250 people. These Aguns will come out and they're dispensing blessings, and everybody wants to get close to them because of the blessing. But they also embody a lot of negative energy. And so if the Agun touches you, you're actually marked for death. One of the important characteristics of an Agun, though, is they are always considered mediators. And so in truce, you'll see this figure in the middle, and his face is covered with the beads that would normally cover the face of the Agun, because you never see the Agun. And the Agun is, on so many levels, the epitome of neutrality. And so I felt it was only proper to use him in this instance. Concurrent with the Black Madonna series, I've also done another group of paintings. The thing that I started to question is what constitutes sainthood? You know, what's the definition of sainthood? I know there's the one that the Catholic Church purports, but you know, there's saints that exist in all other religions too. So I was thinking of those people who had lived exemplary lives, who had helped the poor, maybe, or done things for the disenfranchised. I started really doing research into some of these stories and found some amazing characters that have pretty much been overlooked by history. My time in Brazil introduced me to one in particular. She's considered a folk saint. Her name is Anastasia. And Anastasia was a slave on this plantation. She was reported to have been absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. She was black, but she had blue eyes and light-colored hair, and all reports were that she was just strikingly gorgeous, just beautiful. So much so that the theory is that the mistress of the master wanted to find some way to kind of de-emphasize that beauty, and so she forced her to wear this metal mask over her mouth. And she had to wear the slave collar too. There were all kinds of miracles that were attributed to her. There were all kinds of healings that were attributed to her. She would endure a lot of cruelty as a slave, and on her dying bed, she actually forgave her master and mistress and healed the son, who was very sick at the time. So the Catholic Church refused to recognize Anastasia as a saint. You know, most saints are first beatified, then the Grand Inquisitor goes around and finds how many miracles have been associated with this person and stuff like that. But for whatever reason, she isn't recognized. And all the shrines to her in Brazil were ordered taken down by the Vatican. But the people there didn't pay attention to that. You can still find shrines to Anastasia in many places. So, you know, she was one of these tragic figures that, for all intents and purposes, had she been white, would probably have been a saint. She would have been canonized. But because she came from Bahia and she was black, and, you know, the suspicion that she was the product of miscegenation, the church would not recognize her, which I always thought was a shame. But I choose to recognize her. Zong is actually kind of a throwback to a series that I started in 2015. It was called Dudas. Basically what it was very gestural work, pen and ink on Duralar. It was very spontaneous. And after a while, the work became, the process of actually creating work became more important than the final product. because while I was doing it, I was actually going through these different states of the subconscious. Same thing that you come across in meditation. But Zong was a little bit of a departure in that I intentionally incorporated figures in this one. The Zong massacre, which goes back to 1781, there was a ship that was traveling from Africa to Jamaica. The captain had not put up enough provisions to actually take care of the cargo, in this case the slaves. And he had to throw 130 slaves overboard. And so in Zong, what you'll notice is that the slaves in the upper right-hand corner are pretty much intact, but as it moves across to the lower left-hand corner, you'll notice that they start to morph a little bit. And this is me trying to show them kind of going into the spirit world. When the captain got back to Jamaica, he tried to file an insurance claim for the lost cargo, and the insurance claim was denied. He did an appeal when he got back to England, and that too was denied. But it got so much publicity that it was actually the thing that started the abolitionist movement in England. And within another 12 years, slavery was abolished in England. So, it's interesting how things like that happen. I have, since all of this has been kicked up, I have my white friends that call me up all the time saying, well, what can we do? So it's like, I can't tell you what to do. I've been working at this for, most of my life. Now it's time for you to work on it. Call out your friends that decide that they want to say something that's inappropriate. Make sure that they understand how unpopular and how un-American that is, actually. That's about the only thing that you can do. If you've changed your mind, if you attest to being woke, so to speak, then that's the extension of that. This is exactly what you have to do in order to do that. Or you come up with your own ways of dealing with the situation. But at this point, we're tired. We don't want to deal with it. So it's your turn.